Today I'm reviewing the Anbernic RG556 retro gaming handheld that runs on Android. I've been excited to get my hands on this model as it seems to have many of the features that I have been looking for in a larger mid-range device, such as the ability to play up to PS2 and GameCube games, stream games from a PC or console, has an OLED screen, good battery life, and at a decent price of under $200. I was hoping that it would live up to all my expectations, and so far, I have to say it has. Let's get on with it and get into the review. I first want to thank the Emulation Store on Amazon for sending me this device to review. I'm not receiving any payment for this video and will be sharing my unfiltered thoughts and opinions. The device's base retail price is $185 on the official Anbernic website. This is for the device only, without shipping factored in. The price will increase if you add one of their preloaded SD cards. Usually SD cards that come with these devices are not of great quality. The ROMs on them are also hit or miss. Some of them may have issues running, some may be in other languages, and most likely you will see some duplicates. So it's generally recommended that you get a brand name SD card and source your own ROMs. However, the preloaded SD cards can be an option for people who want to quickly get into playing games with minimal setup, allowing them to test the device, or for people who might just be getting into this hobby, this can be a decent launching point. But I would not recommend it as a long-term solution. Shipping times from Anbernic will depend on where you live. For me here in the US, it normally takes around 15 to 20 days from their store. On Amazon, including the Emulation Store, the RG556 sells anywhere from $250 to $270, depending on sales and coupons. These normally come with an Anbernic preloaded 128GB stock SD card bundled in. Even so, this is quite a price increase, and I would not recommend it to people looking for the cheapest option. But I know people have different priorities, so if you're an Amazon Prime member and value getting the 2-day free delivery, having an easy Amazon return process available to you, that may be worth the price increase, but that is your decision to make. I'm going to quickly go over what comes in the box. I'll have the specs listed on the screen for people who want to look over them. If you have seen other Anbernic box openings, you should already know what to expect. First, we have the device itself. It comes with the wet and dry wipes to apply the included screen protector, the manual with some helpful information explaining some settings and a hotkeys list, and I was sent the version with the preloaded SD card, and finally, a USB-C to USB-A charging cord. Now, let's take a closer look at the device itself. It comes in two colors. As you can see here, I have the transparent blue. I'm not normally a fan of the transparent cases and tend to lean more towards the discreet dark gray or black versions, but it's kind of nice to have something different. This transparent case is very clear and not the normal frosted semi-opaque ones I see more often. It almost has like a jelly look to it, which I think looks pretty cool. It has a very glossy plastic texture. It's not extremely slippery, and with the grips, it never really feels like it's going to slide out of my hands. The case does seem to accumulate smudges and fingerprints. On the front left side, we have the analog stick above the D-pad. Under the D-pad, we have two buttons. One is the Anbernic Frontend button, and the other is the Home/Back button. On the front right side, we have the 4 standard face buttons, the right analog stick, and the start and select buttons below that. In the center, we have the 16:9, 5.4-inch 1080p OLED touchscreen. And on the top of the device are the bumpers, analog triggers, power and volume buttons. This grill here is the exhaust port for the fan, which you can see on the back. And you can also see the air intake here on the lower side. On the bottom, we have the headphone jack, USB-C charging port, which can also be used for 1080p output, USB-C to HDMI, the SD card expansion slot. And it took me a moment to find the speakers because they are on the tips of the grips right here. I think this was a cool design choice, and I have not noticed my hands covering them up at all. There are no buttons on the right or left side of the device, but I can show here that it has the contoured handle-like grips, which does increase the device's profile, but these feel much more comfortable than holding like a flat box-shaped handheld. So I gladly accept the trade-off of it being a little bulkier, as long as it's more comfortable, especially on a device that's already in the mid-range and not really meant for pocketing. I'll show some size comparisons here with some other handhelds. One of the main positives of this device is the screen. This OLED screen is amazing. You may see some lines flashing across it in this video, but this is just a video artifact that can happen when recording OLED screens, and not something you're going to see with the device in person. If you have ever used an OLED screen before, you already know what you're getting with it, with its perfect blacks, great contrast, and amazing viewing angles. Showing it off on screen is a little hard, but I highly doubt anyone would be disappointed moving from an LCD or IPS screen to an OLED. The brightness range is very good. The darkest setting is dim enough for playing in a dark room, and the brightest setting works wonders when outdoors, even in direct sunlight. By default, the color contrast really pops out. Android does have contrast options, so this is something that you can turn off if the enhanced contrast is something you don't like and you like more of a natural color profile. If you already can't tell, I am a huge fan of OLED screens, and to me, they are a game changer in terms of viewing any type of media, including games, new and old. Now to go over the controls. I'm glad they placed the left analog stick in the main position above the D-pad with a device like this. The analog stick will be used often with things like PS2, GameCube, PC, and console streaming. The sticks themselves feel okay, maybe a little bit on the smaller side, but after using them for a month, I can say that they are in the middle of the road regarding performance. They're not the worst I've tried, but they're also not perfect. They suffer slightly from the same over-snapping to the cardinal directions issue that the 35XXH had, but it's not as egregious. So you can still get it to register between the diagonals, but you just have to put a little more effort into it, and you may get more unintentional inputs to the diagonals than I would like. Another thing to note though is that unlike the 35XXH, this issue seems to be fixable by replacing the analog sticks with Hall effect sticks. The D-pad feels good, even in the lower position. It's not directly under the analog stick, but nudged over closer to the screen, as you would find on a modern controller. Even though it's not shifted as much as like an Xbox controller, a little bit goes a long way, making it more comfortable to reach. When playing games strictly using the D-pad, the case's contoured grips allow me to slide my hand down, and my fingers still have something to grab onto on the back, feeling fairly comfortable. Unlike other more flat box-like devices, with little to hold onto when using it in a lower position for the D-pad, half of my fingers don't really have anywhere to go. Examples that come to mind are like the RG405M, or the 2DS, or even the Switch. This is not to say that these devices are extremely uncomfortable, but the RG556, hands down, feels better for extended sessions. I did want to report that when using the D-pad for the first couple days, I did start to notice a squeaking noise that only started after pressing one direction repeatedly. Then when using a different direction, it would correct itself after a while. It was probably caused by the D-pad rubbing against the case, or maybe the membrane pad underneath. I checked around and found only a few other people that seemed to have reported the same issue, so it's probably not that common. After the second week of use, I struggled to recreate this squeak, so it may have fixed itself with the D-pad just kind of getting broken in with use. On to some false diagonal testing. A false diagonal is when you go to input one of the cardinal directions and get a diagonal instead. This can happen when the D-pad is too sensitive to an input that was maybe slightly off the mark, pressing on one of the corners, and not straight on. A D-pad that is too sensitive to diagonal inputs can make it hard or annoying to play a game where strict inputs are needed. However, a D-pad where the diagonals are too hard to input can make games requiring quarter or half circle inputs like fighting games harder to play. I like to try a few games that I find false diagonals easy to notice and annoying when occurring. I played a good hour of the Tetris-like game Apotros, where any up diagonal performs a quick drop. Then I completed a playthrough of Kirby's Dream Land, where an up diagonal makes him fly, and a down diagonal would make him stop walking completely. During these tests, I only noticed one false diagonal, and that could have been just my fault, as my inputs got sloppier when Tetris was speeding up. I also played some fighting games, and found no issues pulling off any of the special moves. I can safely say that the false diagonals are not an issue, at least with the device that I have been testing. The two issues I do have with the D-pad are, number one, is the smooth, glossy texture. I'm just not a fan of this. I would rather have a more textured D-pad. It's not a huge deal, it's more of a personal preference. And the second issue is that the corners are a little sharper than I like. It's not something that really bothers me until I start to play a fighting game, and then after a while, I can kind of tell it does some work on my thumb. And I find the D-pads with the more rounded corners more comfortable. I found no issues with any of the buttons on the device. The 4 membrane buttons feel good, as always, from Anbernic devices. The same goes for any of the other clicky buttons on the face or shoulders. Something to note is that we have analog triggers here, which some games can take advantage of. I'm glad to say that they work properly here, as you can see in this example from Mario Sunshine. He will continue to run and shoot water when you slightly press the trigger, and then when you fully press it, he becomes stationary, allowing you to aim. Some other features on the device. Bluetooth seems to work properly. I was able to connect my 8BitO Bluetooth controllers without any issues. My Bluetooth headphones work, but you will have the higher latency, like most devices have, that use the standard Bluetooth codec. The latency can be reduced slightly when using like a gaming or low latency mode on your headphones if they have them. This won't bother everyone, but people who know that they are sensitive to latency, you will have that here. It has 2.4 and 5 GHz Wi-Fi. For game streaming to be enjoyable, a 5 GHz network connection is required. I tried it on 2.4 and it was just unplayable. You can do video output with the USB-C to HDMI. This is not something that I normally do, but I do get a lot of questions about it. One thing here is that because of the single USB-C port, I don't think it's possible to charge the device while you are using the video output. This means you can use it like a console, but you will be on limited time. The RG556 has 128 gigabytes of internal storage, so an SD card is optional, as you can put most of your ROMs directly on the device. However, if you plan on playing Android games or have a large library of PS2 or GameCube games, you're probably going to want to invest in a large brand name SD card. A quick heads up, when you're inserting the SD card, it goes face up, pins down. This caught me a little off guard, as most of the other Anbernic devices I have used are the other way around. The speakers are pretty decent. They can get fairly loud without getting distorted. They're not going to blow you away, and they lack bass like most of these smaller speakers, but I find them passable. If I want to play anything where I'm going to appreciate the music or the sound, I'm still going to go with headphones. Without going too deep into Android versus Linux, as I'll save that for another video, I want to at least touch on a few points. Android devices normally require more work and setup to utilize their full potential. People familiar with the Android operating system may find this easier than someone who's completely new to Android. It does bring many benefits, some of them being access to many emulator apps that have been around for a long time, having access to the Google Play Store, a fantastic sleep and idle mode, just to name a few. With many Linux devices, you can find a nice custom firmware that will do a lot of the setup work for you, pop in an SD card, and get right to playing. So they each have their benefits. You can navigate on the homepage using the touchscreen or the physical buttons, and by default there's 3 pages. You can see that the emulators are on the 2nd page, and the Google Play Store and Moonlight app are on the 3rd. A few settings I just want to go over quickly that are unique to this device. Most of them are here in the quick menu, which can be accessed by swiping down from the top of the screen. The first one allows you to toggle the analog lighting here that you may notice that shows up around the analog sticks. Many of these quick settings have more options if you hold down on the setting itself. So here for the analog lighting, we now have more settings to change the ambient light, whether it be a lower brightness or different lighting modes. I'm not the biggest fan of these, so I normally turn them off. Another setting is the CPU mode. I have seen some people say that they did not notice a change when turning this on. However, I can confirm that it can help depending on the system that you are currently playing. When I tried this with the default PS2 app, I did not see much of a change in performance, but when I tried it with Wii games, it helped greatly. I find it's best just to leave this off for improved battery life until you play something where it seems like it might be struggling to run, and then it's worth enabling it just to see if it helps. There's a fan setting here that has 3 modes, not including off. Auto will enable and disable the fan when needed. Cool seems to set the fan to a moderate speed, and then strong sets the fan to its maximum speed. I have not noticed any issues with heat generation. When playing PS2 or other demanding games, I normally have the fan set to auto, and it does kick on after a bit. The fan noise is pretty quiet on the auto setting, but when set to strong, you will definitely hear it. When this setting is turned to Xbox mode, it swaps the A and B and X and Y buttons to be in the format of the Xbox controller. If you hold down this option, you can then change how the analog triggers function for each mode, having the trigger either act like a button press or with the analog trigger axis. When it comes to launching games, you have a couple options. You can launch the app for the system you want to play. So for SNES, you could launch SNES 9X. You would then have to load your ROMs by selecting Open Content, and then tap on the top left arrow, browse to your folder, and select your games there. But I find the stock front end a better option than this. I will provide a basic overview of some of the Anbernic front end features. In a separate video, I will go over all the settings, usage, and how to make it work with a non-stock SD card, as it would make this video a little too long to add here. I'll link that video in the description once I release it. You can launch or exit the front end by hitting the button in the bottom left of the device with the R on it, or from the Android quick menu. It has many basic front end features, like a place to browse and launch all of your games from separate systems, a favorites menu, a recently played list, some basic settings like choosing between a few theme layouts and different artwork, a place to hide systems you might not need or want to see. You can change what emulator is being launched for that specific system, and a place to manually add ROM locations if the SD card does not load them properly, or if you decide to store them on the internal storage. Now, if you're an intermediate or an advanced user, I doubt you would want to use this, and you will more likely want to take the time to set up one of the other front ends I will be going over in a little bit. So ultimately, this is a bare bones front end. This is something for non-technical users or people who are just starting out in this hobby, and is better than having to launch each game from its own separate app. But I recommend that everyone learn to set up and use one of the better front ends if they have the time to do so. Now, if we're going to talk about the device's full potential, most, if not all of these stock apps are out of date. You can play many games without issue, but updating these apps will be needed for the best performance, especially for PS2, GameCube, and Wii games. Some are easy to update, like Dolphin, while others have been removed from the Play Store and require you to sideload them, like Aether SX2. There are also better front-end options, like Digisto, which is a free and somewhat simple front-end to use and set up. It has many great features and can be downloaded from the App Store. Or the recently released Android version of Emulation Station. It's a paid app that requires sideloading, and it takes a little more time to set up, but it is fantastic once you have it going. I've decided to cover these topics in another video, as I think it would be too much to just put in one. Okay, let's go over some of the performance. The RG556 can play all of the older retro games without issue. So let's talk about the limits of its capabilities. Unless otherwise stated, I used all stock emulator apps with the CPU mode set to high for these tests. The 3DS is great for the most part, even at 2x resolution. There are some stutters when shaders are compiling, but a setting called asynchronous shader compilation, located in the Citra settings, can fix this for many games. Now, this setting can cause issues and introduce flickering on some games, but I did not experience that for the ones that I tried. It's just something to be aware of. Most GameCube games ran great even at 2x resolution. I used the MMJR version of Dolphin, as it ran better for most of the games that I tried than the normal Dolphin app. But like I said before, updating to the latest version of Dolphin will probably give you even better results than that, with the right settings. Many PS2 games ran great at resolutions between 1 and 2. Games like SSX Tricky, Dark Cloud, Final Fantasy X, Tony Hawk 4 ran almost with no issues. However, more demanding games like Soul Calibur 3, I could not get it to run well with the stock app. But here is one of the cases where when I updated to the Nether SX2 app, Soul Calibur 3 was able to then run great. This is going to be the story for a lot of these games, but some of them, even after updating the emulator, may still struggle, have issues, or just be unplayable. Like Wild Arms 3 is a game that is notoriously hard to emulate. As you can see here, even after updating, it's just a no-go. With PS2 having such a huge library, not everything is going to be perfect, but I feel that most will at least be playable. For Wii games, I found to run most of them at 1x resolution, and you may even want to use the PAL version to help with some FPS, but they ran a lot better than I thought they would, even with some slowdowns. I would not recommend this for Switch emulation. Yes, you can get it to run, but only with many tweaks, and it will be limited to the less demanding games. If you're curious about performance with other games, I recommend checking out the RG556 Reddit community's compatibility spreadsheet. I will post a link to that in the description, onto Moonlight or game streaming. I tested streaming games from my PC using the Moonlight app, and it worked beautifully after I forced it to only connect using my 5 GHz network. I also tested the Gamepass cloud streaming for the first time. I was pleasantly surprised how well it ran. After streaming games for hours on both of these services, I can say that the games felt responsive. There is always going to be a little bit of latency, more so with the Gamepass cloud service than just streaming it yourself, but I did not run in or encounter any major issues. Now, this is also going to highly depend on your Wi-Fi network strength, coverage, and stability. You can also download and play Android games from the Play Store. Anything using a touchscreen works fine, but if you want to use the controls for some games, you will need to use the touchscreen remapper tool. It's not the most intuitive tool, but I'll cover some of the basics real quick. To launch it, you go to the quick menu, hold down on the key map button, and the menu will appear. You will then see images of all the buttons on the screen corresponding to the 556's controls. You can move and place these manually, but before you do that, you should check to see if there's a preset already made for that game you want to play. You can tap on the Config Manager here on the left, then swipe through, see if there's any presets that have a name similar to the game. If you do find one, you can click Use. It should then populate the screen with all the buttons you need, and then when you have everything set, you can hit the Switch button to activate it, and then you can close the menu. When you're done using it, you can open it back up the same way by tapping and holding on the button in the quick menu, hit the Switch button to disable it, and then close it out. It's not perfect, but it's usable for a decent amount of games that require touch input. There are some other options out there for different apps that you may want to try. A lot of these are paid, and I have not tried them myself. Alright, to kind of wrap everything up, if you couldn't tell already, I really like this device. It's not perfect, but it's fairly close, at least for what I was looking for. The analog sticks and D-pad could be improved, which that may be a future project I take on. And because it's an Android device, more time and effort will be required to unlock the device's full potential, but even just stock, using the Anbernic Frontend, it is usable with a decent experience that I think would work as a starting point for a lot of people who could then gradually improve the device by learning more and adding either other front ends or updating these emulators at your own speed. While not the best, the performance has been good enough for what I want from this kind of device. It's not as powerful as a Retroid Pocket 4 or an Odin 2, so you won't be pushing the resolutions as high or getting Switch emulation. So that may be a deciding factor for you whether you would choose one of those devices over this one. Personally, I would rather have the better screen and something more comfortable. It has become my go-to device for around-the-house gaming when I'm not on the PC or for long trips. It's portable, but not pocketable, so it's not going to replace my smaller devices, as they serve a different purpose. I can easily put them in my pocket, walk out the door, take them anywhere, pull them out, play them for a few minutes, and put them away. But the RG556 has blown me away. It is the most comfortable handheld of its size that I have used. The OLED screen is beautiful, it has great battery life, plays almost any retro game from the PS2, GameCube era and before that I have thrown at it. Then add the ability to stream modern games from my PC, console, or Gamepass, access to Android games from the Play Store, and all of this for around or under $200 is just an awesome and no-brainer recommendation. But I would love to hear your thoughts on the device, or what your favorite handheld is for this price range. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and I'll try to answer them as soon as possible. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And as always, thank you for watching.